So welcome to today's webinar, including stuttering in diversity and inclusion. We have lots to talk about that and share today. But first, I want to introduce myself. I'm Pamela Mertz. I sit on the board of directors of the National Stuttering Association, and I've been one of the leaders behind the initiative of our We Stutter at Work program. And co-facilitating with me today is my esteemed colleague, Chris. Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Chris Constantino. I'm an assistant professor at Florida State University in Tallahassee,
Great.
Florida. I teach stuttering and counseling, and do research on sort of how people experience their own stuttering. So stuttering from the speaker's point of view. And what I'm most interested in is a bit of what we're going to talk about later on is, are there experiences that people who stutter gain by being people who stutter? So we'll see how that fits into diversity and inclusion as the talk goes on.
Great, and I just want to say I'm really excited that Chris is co-facilitating this, because he's quite modest, and he didn't share that this is really one of his areas of not only interest but expertise as well. So for any of you that are new to one of our webinars, let me just take a quick moment and go through the logistics of how the Zoom platform works. If you notice down in the corner, the left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see an icon, a microphone icon that will mute yourself. So we ask that if you're not talking, that you keep yourself on mute, because that eliminates background noise for us. Right next to that, there's an icon for stop video. If you, I don't know, if you have to get up and go to the bathroom or something and you want to just stop the video, you can just turn yourself off for a moment. Right down on the bottom, in the bottom tray, you'll see an icon that says chat. This is more towards the right. So if you click on that, you'll see a sidebar will open up, and that's where we will encourage you during the first part of the webinar. If you have any comments or questions that you'd like to note, feel free to share that in that area. We plan to have about 30 or 35 minutes of information that we will share, and then as has been our experience with the last few webinars, we will take about 20 minutes to have some back and forth and take some questions from you all. So I'm going to go back and well, I'm not going to screen share yet. So again, we're talking about including stuttering in diversity and inclusion. So what I want to start with is ask you all, what does that mean? So if you could go into the chat section and just write kind of what immediately comes to mind when you think of diversity and inclusion, just so that we can kind of get a ballpark of maybe what people are thinking. If you're not aware, diversity and inclusion is a huge buzzword these days in employment, in human resources work, and there are jobs such as diversity and inclusion managers or directors that simply did not exist 10 or 15 years ago. So I just want to get kind of like a ballpark thought as to what you think D&I or diversity and inclusion means. So Ginger has started us off, shared a good thought. She thinks of traditionally marginalized groups. Anybody else have a thought or an idea what we think it is? Anna, one of my favorite people from Kansas, celebrating the contributions of people who stutter or other communication disorders in the workplace. I like Doug's, employers and people in general, giving a fair opportunity to people who stutter to fully participate in their jobs and society in general. Different experiences in learning, interacting, and representation, and being open to other ways of thinking, other cultural understandings within a group. Wow. So people have some really, really good knowledge of a relatively, in my opinion, a relatively siloed phrase, because I'm not a diversity and inclusion professional, so I don't really know exactly like what the actual job responsibilities are, but it is to foster diversity and difference in the workplace. So just to start off, one definition on diversity that we found, which I'm not going to type in there because it will be it'll be caught in the archive. Diversity is about moving beyond simple tolerance to embracing and celebrating the rich dimensions of diversity included or contained within each individual. And one of the points that we want to make today when we're talking about diversity is that on its own, diversity is simply representation, and somebody used that word in the chat box. So simply representing people of color, people with different speech patterns, gender. And today, gender is so much more complicated than it was 30 years ago. But for many people, just looking at diversity as simply representation, it's ticking the box, fulfilling a compliance goal. And diversity started off as something.
Pam,
Yes.
We had a request that you repeat that definition that you had originally used.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. So diversity is about moving beyond simple tolerance to embracing and celebrating the rich dimensions of diversity contained within each individual. That's a definition of diversity that I have found that I really like, and that counters what's on the screen. It's not just simply having people represent it, because as I said, and I'm glad Chris interrupted me, because we need to be sure we do that with each other if we see points that need to be brought up. 30 years ago, diversity was just about compliance and legality. People wanted to be sure that they were a diverse workplace because they didn't want to not be in compliance with affirmative action. Slowly, diversity changed to include customer service, because businesses recognized that customers are more diverse. And so therefore, the workplaces, the goods and the products and the services of an organization needed to also reflect the customer base. And then finally, now what workplaces are seeing and value the importance of diversity for is that a more diverse workplace fosters more creativity. So when you have different perspectives in the workplace, you naturally are able to have different views, different lenses, and therefore people working together toward a common goal are able to be more creative. Whoops, what happened? Don't know what happened right there. All right. So I want to just take a quick minute and give you a 3-minute overview of this wonderful book that's called A Peacock in the Land of Penguins. And this book is about diversity and inclusion, and it's one of the best that I have found describing what happens when people with differences come into a mainstream environment. So this fable talks about the land of penguins. And if you can visualize, and you can see on the screen, penguins all look the same. They all have the same outfit on, they walk the same with the slow gait, and they all speak the same. And the penguins have been very successful in all of their enterprises. They seek out people that look, act, and talk like themselves. Well, the penguins had the good fortune to be able to go out into the world, and they recruited a peacock, because Perry the peacock was this bright, creative, fashionable, new age dude that had some really great ideas that the penguins wanted to bring into their workplace. So they recruited Perry because they thought he'd be a great talent, and he would help them broaden their business and better appeal to their customer base. But slowly, as Perry became acclimated to the penguins' workplace, something happened. The penguins were saying, yes, we value diversity, but they were not comfortable really when Perry flashed his beautiful bright feathers too much. And what happened is that several senior penguins pulled Perry the peacock aside and suggested, Perry, why don't you try this penguin suit on for size? We think that you would be great as a corporate leader on our executive team, but we think you'd be a better fit if you put on one of our penguin suits. And Perry decided that was not going to work for him. It wasn't comfortable. He felt like he was being asked to conform, and he largely decided that he needed to go off into the land of opportunity and find something where his bright feathers and his differences would be better accepted. So here's where we come into talking about inclusion. So inclusion at its simplest core is, yes, you have a diverse workplace. You've got people of different color, different talent, different speech patterns, different genders, different socioeconomic classes. You have them in your employ, but are they actually invited to a seat at the table? Are they part of the decision making? And is their perspective actually sought after, welcomed, and valued? So inclusion talks about people are better able to foster innovation and impact the business's bottom line when employees feel comfortable bringing their whole self to work. But with stuttering, are corporations getting more than they bargained for when employees are stuttering openly in the workplace? So we have some thoughts about how that might look, and I'm going to pass the baton over to Chris, and he's going to talk a little bit about what we need to do as people who stutter and employers that hire us to actually have truly inclusive workplaces. So over to you, Chris.
Great. I really like what you just mentioned about do people who stutter feel comfortable bringing their whole self to work? Because that's I think that really gets to the heart of the issue that we're going to be talking about, which is does stuttering bring anything of value to the workplace? And to be clear, I don't think our argument for diversity and inclusion actually needs to rest on this. I think we should be included regardless of whether our stuttering adds anything. I think if you look at a lot of the research on stuttering and employability and employment statistics, sort of across the board, people who stutter seem to be underemployed compared to their fluent peers. But a lot of the reason for their underemployment seems to be tied not to personal characteristics, but to discrimination in the workplace. So not being looked at for promotions, being judged for the way their speech sounds rather than what they're saying. And so even if you get in the door of a company, do you have room to grow? Do you have room to move up the ladder? Are you valued as just a person in general? But also, does your stuttering bring anything of value in and of itself? And so I think there's a beginning line of research that I'm really excited about that suggests that there is something valuable about stuttering. And this line of work sort of follows from lots of other disability groups who have been exploring this question, from autism to ADHD to dyslexia. There's lots of researchers looking at not only do the experiences that we have as members of these groups shape who we are and how we learn. So is there anything we gain from the past experience of stuttering? But is there anything that we gain by being a person who stutters sort of in the moment of this stuttering? And we're going to talk about both of those. But first I want to talk about sort of the changing job landscape and what that means for the skills employers are looking for, and then how stuttering might fit into that. So there was a document published last year by the World Economic Forum called the Future of Jobs Report, which is basically looking at the skills that are going to be valued moving forward to the year 2022. Are we still sharing screens, Pam?
Nope, because I was responding to a question on the chat, and I can't do that when I'm screen sharing. Would you like me to put that back up?
No, do what you got to do.
Okay, great.
I can just keep on talking.
All right.
And it seems that is what's happening in a lot of jobs, is that computers and automation are taking away more and more of the technical aspects of jobs. And what human beings bring to the table are how we interact, what the report is calling emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is defined as things such as concern for others, ability to cooperate, and empathy. And the really good news is that those exact things that the job report is saying are going to be important in the future dovetail really nicely into what this beginning line of research is suggesting people who stutter have skills in. Researchers have found that fluent listeners thought people who stutter were more caring, patient, kind, accepting, understanding, and intelligent. They also suggest they're more empathetic. Another study that carried out very similar work found that the general public, not people who stutter, but just people in general, thought people who stutter developed from their stuttering empathy and compassion for others, a sensitivity to the needs of others, more self-awareness, greater patience, and a focus on helping others, as well as a strong work ethic. The authors summed up their findings as fluent speakers felt people who stutter had great strength, motivation, compassion, and acceptance. Research looking at skills people who stutter felt that they themselves possessed seems to validate the views that fluent speakers have of people who stutter. The people who stutter felt that stuttering increased their empathy, language skills, communication skills, and patience. And why I get so excited about these, yeah, I can share some of these studies with y'all. We'll figure out the best way to do that. Why I get so excited about this is that something I like, a question I like to think about and that I like to pose to my clients is that as people who stutter, do we have any experiences because we stutter that we would not have if we were fluent, right? And are any of those experiences good ones? Are any of those experiences ones that we would want to keep, that we would lose access to if we didn't stutter anymore? I guess the obvious experience, right, is the experience of stuttering, right? So I guess the question could be more efficiently asked as, by stuttering, do we gain anything? Is there anything of value we get from stuttering? And the research I mentioned a moment ago is beginning to suggest that there is, that people who stutter may gain greater emotional intelligence. And so I've been thinking a bit about why that might be the case. I think there's obviously anybody who goes through any hardship, people seem to grow. That's a whole movement within psychology called positive psychology, that people seem to grow from their past challenges. But is there anything specific about the experience of stuttering that adds value, or are our challenges just grouped into anybody else who experiences discrimination or hardship? And my theory is that stuttering is unique in that it increases how we experience intimacy. I think the hallmark of stuttering is the temporary inability to move forward through speech. Speech pathologists usually describe this as a loss of control. So when we stutter, we temporarily lose control of our speech. This can be unsettling. It can be scary. I think in general, it's a deeply vulnerable experience, right? We're temporarily standing in front of somebody speaking, and we're out of control. It's as if we're like temporarily stripped naked and left unprotected. We're just standing there vulnerable. And while this might be the start of a nightmare, it, I think if this vulnerability is reciprocated, if the person we're speaking to sort of enters into it with us, then it can become a source of intimacy. So if you think about it, if repeatedly throughout our day we're left temporarily defenseless, we are periodically stripped naked, then we are repeatedly inviting others to share in our vulnerability. And my theory is that the more time we spend naked with others, the more likely we are to experience intimacy. So I think stuttering fosters emotional intelligence because by lowering our guards, we can cause others to lower their guards. And so our conversations can take on additional emotional depth that they might not if we didn't stutter. This can turn just ordinary, vapid social interactions into potentially deep, intimate, and consequential ones. It's as if stuttering is a signal to others that the conversational space is safe and we're not going to be keeping score of decorum or grading them on etiquette. We're just going to be talking. If we allow stuttering to happen, we can invite others to strip and join us. Without all the distraction of fonts and facades, we increase our chances of connecting to others and having worthwhile, meaningful conversations. To be clear, I don't think you need stuttering to experience intimacy. Fluent speakers are perfectly capable of experiencing intimacy with others. It's just that fluent speakers can't experience it by stuttering, right? Stutterers have an avenue to intimacy that fluent speakers don't. And we bring that avenue into each and every conversation that we have. And so I think this vulnerability and intimacy that stuttering injects into each and every conversation is what leads to our greater emotional intelligence. However, and this is where I think diversity and inclusion is really important, there's a hiccup to the research that I cited, and that is that both people who stutter and fluent speakers had to be invited to think about stuttering as a strength before they named the strengths that stuttering brought. Their default position was to see stuttering as a deficit, right? When they look at stuttering as a deficit, instead of seeing emotional intelligence, they see stuttering as something that makes people shy, nervous, and anxious. So by default, and this isn't a surprise to anybody, people are socially programmed to see disability as something bad, to see stuttering as something bad. And diversity and inclusion, if done properly, helps people who stutter feel safe in their places of employment. And if we're going to be able to use our stuttering to foster intimacy, to be vulnerable in conversations, to really grow our emotional intelligence skills, we have to be able to stutter openly and comfortably. And if we feel like we're going to get fired if we stutter, not only does that harm us, but it robs our employers of a potentially valuable employee who has unique skills to bring to the table. So while I think stuttering benefits both us and those around us by creating these intimate conversations, increasing our emotional intelligence, we really do require our employers to sort of create an environment that facilitates that type of communication.
So Chris, I have a question that I've been holding off on for the last couple minutes, but you know, what you're saying, I think begs the question, so should employers hire us because we stutter? I mean, are we like waving a flag and saying, hey, hire us because we have all these amazing competencies that the workplace needs?
I think we should be hired because we have the skills for the job that we're going to be hired for, just like anybody else, right? There's nothing to suggest that people who stutter are any more or less competent at most jobs than fluent speakers. And so I think we should be hired based on the fact that we're human beings who have competencies just like every other human being, and that we shouldn't be discriminated against because of the way we talk. That said, I think there's potential, just like you were talking about with diversity and in your first slide, that having a diverse environment creates an environment where there's more creativity because people bring different perspectives, right? People bring different strengths, different weaknesses, different experiences. And I think my point is not that because we stutter, we deserve to be hired, but that because we stutter, we have unique experiences that do add to the diversity of a working place, and that those experiences are valuable and add to the richness of the work environment.
Great, thanks. Because I remember having a conversation with somebody about this very thing recently, and we talked about, well, what makes us special, and perhaps employers don't need to hire us because we stutter, but rather employers should be encouraged to remove that cloud of false assumptions they have about us, and see that we can contribute as equally wonderfully as anybody else that doesn't stutter. So I think it's a hard road, because like I also said in the beginning, employers may say they're diverse and inclusive, but it may come down to a different thing when all of a sudden they have all these employees happily stuttering away, and they're nervous about it.
Well, and I think that's where that second prong comes in, because it's one thing to hire a stutterer, and it's another thing to allow them to stutter in the workplace, right? And so just like with any other identity that might be part of diversity, just because you hire somebody, if they're not, you said something earlier that I liked. If they're not allowed to bring their whole self to work, that's what you had said. Mm-hmm. If they're not allowed to bring their whole self to work, if they have to conform, then you're actually losing out on a part of that person that could be valuable. And so what I think is, so there's the obvious things you lose out on, right? If a person who stutter has to hide their stuttering, that person is not going to be an effective communicator. They're going to be switching words. They're going to be not saying what they really want to say. They're going to have additional anxiety placed on them, additional workplace stress placed on them. So you're going to have a worker who's generally struggling more than they would, but you're also losing, and this is what I was talking about, that additional thing that stuttering brings, right? And that's why I think it's so important to try to ask those questions. Is there anything that stuttering brings that this space would lack if stuttering wasn't there? So in addition to stressing out your stuttering worker, you're also losing all those nice things that stuttering brings to the table.
Okay, I was in mid type as I was just adding the inclusion definition in the chat box. So before we roll over to take a couple questions, Chris, what are your thoughts on? I think you kind of already expressed this, but so what can we do as people who stutter to help make the workplace more inclusive?
I think depending on your workplace is going to be different, right? So I'm tempted to say every time you openly stutter, you make the world safer for other stutterers. But I want to put a huge qualification on that, which is that if your job is unsafe for people who stutter, if you will be fired for stuttering or demoted or moved to a different position where you're not talking or interfacing with customers or with the public, you have families and people who are depending on you for livelihood. I think in addition to stuttering openly, talking about stuttering with your superiors, talking about stuttering with your coworkers, right? I think most places it should be safe to mention that you stutter, even if you don't, even though it's not safe to show it, right? So that's that like first level of diversity that we were talking about, where people are hired, but they have to conform and be a penguin, even if they're a peacock. Right. So if that's the kind of place that you're in, I think sort of continuing to talk about peacocks, right, is a good strategy. But if you're in a place that's cool with peacocks, I think the more you can stutter openly, the safer and environment you can create.
Right. Excellent point. And we have about 20 minutes left, so we absolutely want to take some questions from folks. And somebody did type in a question right off the bat based on your last thoughts, Chris. So where does that leave therapy?
I think therapy is I'm a therapist. I think therapy is always a good option. I think therapy is, but I think it has to be seen as something that can help people stutter easier, stutter with less tension, stutter with less struggle, stutter shorter, stutter in the way that they want to. But there's very little evidence that we can make most people who stutter fluent, right? And so I think therapy, if you're really struggling to speak, I would absolutely recommend somebody who stutters goes. However, not everybody has the time or the will or the money to attend therapy. And so I want to hedge my advocacy for therapy by also saying, I think it should be okay for a person to speak, even if they have the most struggled, tense stuttering in the world, because maybe they're not at a place in their lives where changing their stuttering is feasible at the moment. So I think therapy is a complement to diversity and inclusion. I would really like to see part of inclusion being employers helping people who stutter get good therapy, right? That would be a wonderful piece to the puzzle, because I think a big barrier to therapy is the cost and the time. So if employers were willing to let their employees who stutter take a little bit of time to get therapy, I think that would be a huge help.
And interestingly, I've been doing a little bit of work on that with the military support that the National Stuttering Association provides. And recently, I had the opportunity to speak with a congressperson's legislative aide, and they are promoting a bill which would allow military personnel to attend therapy while they're active duty. So you're right. I think some places are moving towards that. the time to attend therapy could easily be a reasonable accommodation for a person who stutters, right?
LJ made a comment that his employer gave him time off to attend an intensive therapy, which I think is wonderful. And Ginger has a really nice comment about that self-advocacy being a part of role-playing in therapy. And I think that's an excellent suggestion. Therapy should be a time we use to work on things that are challenging for our clients. And certainly, if you're not used to talking about stuttering, bringing it up with a coworker, with a peer, with a supervisor can be immensely challenging. So yeah, I think that's a great idea.
And Ginger, you can look back at a previous webinar that we did where we talked about self-advocacy in the workplace. And we actually had somebody from the Job Accommodation Network co-facilitate, and we talked about what are reasonable accommodations and how can we self-advocate at work to our bosses that we need that it will benefit the employee and the employer and would not be a burden to the workplace.
It seems like our audience has had some really good employers.
Yeah. Yeah, Doug is saying that his employer paid for and gave time to take therapy in 1988. That's so great. And LJ wrote, which we've already mentioned, LJ, was the time that you took for speech therapy, was that paid time off? Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Great. So Anna asks the question, Chris, to you. You mentioned that in that study, fluent speakers viewed persons who stutter as individuals of strength, motivation, compassion, and I think she's thinking there was one more word.
Let me look up that summary of what I was looking at. So this was a poster that was presented back in 2013, and they said that fluent speakers felt people who stutter had great strength, motivation, compassion, and acceptance.
Awesome.
So do we have other questions? Yes.
Yes. Pam and Chris. Chris, I think you said something about that we should, as we approach an employer or any group, that people who stutter have some unique and special characteristics or skills and or life experiences that we can bring to the job and to the employer. Could you expand upon what specific things, like for example, I'm a person that stutters and they ask me, well, special things that you bring. Can you expand upon what specific things could we sort of highlight that would be a benefit to the employer?
Yeah. So a lot of this initial survey research that I was drawing from is talking a lot about what the person who stutters sort of learns from their stuttering, what they gain from their stuttering. So there's a lot of talk about the tenacity that it takes to sort of deal with this and overcome the hardship. There's talk about how you know, if I must really want what I'm working for, given all the barriers that are in my way. And then there's also the other side of it, which is having gone through a challenge. The people who stutter tend to be more sensitive to other people's challenges, right? So they might have more patience. They might have more empathy. They might have greater listening skills. But and sort of the thing I talk about a lot is, you know, what that moment of stuttering does, right? When I'm sitting there stuttering, how is the person I'm talking to forced to interact with me, right? They have a choice. They could either plow past me and talk over me, or they have to wait and be patient. And sort of in that waiting, they're entering into this intimate moment with me. And so I think stuttering has this ability to sort of ratchet up the level of intimacy in a conversation. That said, I think what your job is might not have anything to do with any of those things, right? And so people who stutter, I think, need to be able to think critically about their experiences. And, you know, what have I gained from this? I've talked to many people who stutter who actually, I was talking with David Mitchell, who's a famous author who stutters in England. And he said that growing up, trying to hide his stuttering gave him a tremendous vocabulary, right? Trying to switch words all the time, trying to come up with a word that he could say fluently. And it also allowed him to really play with how language is put together, right? That he, by trying to construct sentences in a way that he felt he could say fluently, he learned a lot about how language works. And so that was something I think that him being an author was something he was able to say he gained from it. I can't necessarily tell every single person in every single job how stuttering might improve their skills, but hopefully through hearing examples of others, through self-reflection, people can see what they gain from it individually.
I also think, and I don't think anybody's mentioned it, and we certainly shouldn't overlook, people who stutter have a great wealth of resilience, and that is really an important trait to have in the workplace, right? Because at work we often come upon, we didn't finish something on time, or it wasn't the success that we had hoped it would be, or oh gosh, we really screwed up. But at work, you need to be able to move past that and learn from that experience, and take it into the next experience. So having resilience from living with and become expert at having a difference, and again looking at that through the difference perspective rather than the deficit perspective, I think that's a really wonderful asset to bring to work. So we have a few minutes left. Does anybody else have a question that they'd like to ask? The Ginger's asking, are the webinars stored on the NSA website? Yes, and we will have a closing slide here in just a moment or two, pointing you to that. But it's westutter.org /career success, and we have all 10 webinars listed there. And Jonathan is asking, can you email us the slides? These slides will be contained within this video recording, and we will email that to everyone, as well as the chat comments that we have here, because there's really been some really good and rich dialogue in the chat here. So one more question. Does anybody have anything else you'd like to add or share? Christine, good comment. Her experience with students as well as with the teachers and adults, that working with them is breaking down the uncomfortable feeling. Yeah. I agree with that, and I'm certain that Chris does as well. Anytime that we can normalize a difference so that it's not seen as different, there can only be benefit from that experience. And I was sharing with Chris the other day when we were preparing for today. In my view, diversity and inclusion programs, initiatives, campaigns will be successful when we no longer need them. Like, inclusion should be a given. So we should feel accepted and included and have a seat at the table, you know, as a given. So I strongly believe that we'll know that D&I initiatives have been successful when they're just simply not needed anymore. And I think this is John that just shared his stutter has given him a strong work ethic, and the perfectionist streak in him, which was developed to overcompensate for disfluency, has helped him be more attentive to details. Again, a very important trait to have at work.
Yeah, and I think stuttering is often like the process of therapy often takes years or decades, right? The learning to speak more easily is not an easy task. And so the ability to work on something for a long period of time that requires a great deal of patience. And just like Kristen is saying, in order to work on it, you have to be comfortable with this uncomfortable feeling, right? You have to be able to let yourself stutter. And so a tolerance for discomfort, I think, is also something we all gain from our stuttering.
Absolutely. And to just go back to my parable on the land of opportunity that Perry the Peacock eventually felt that he needed to head to instead of staying in penguin land, the land of opportunity becomes a reality when we stop judging each other by superficial criteria, perhaps fluency, and begin to truly see and appreciate everyone as uniquely talented, capable, and valuable. So those would be good descriptors for inclusive workplaces. And what we're looking for and hoping for, that that stuttering get included in the diversity and inclusion initiatives that are already out there. So to wrap up, somebody did ask, is all of this information on the NSA website? Yes, and we encourage you to visit us at westutter.org, career success. All 10 of the webinars are housed there. Each of you that pre-registered for today's event, we will send a follow-up email in a few days with the link to this webinar, and also the chat transcript. And also on our career success site, we also have information about mock interviews, again, the archived webinars, and educational material that is there and available for employers. And the NSA is reaching out to employers to do more of that education and raising awareness, which is really important. So I want to thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Chris, for being such a great co-facilitator. And as we've done in the past, if everybody can unmute themselves at this time and just say hey and bye.
Thank you so much.
All.
Thank you, everybody.
Hey, and
Thank you, guys.
See you, everyone.
Chris and Pam, thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doug.
John, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.